You knew something was wrong when they removed their hand from yours before the elevator doors opened. A moment earlier, they had been holding on tightly, almost as if they were afraid you might disappear. Then they saw someone waiting in the lobby and stepped away without explaining. The stranger looked at them, then at you, with the quiet recognition of someone who already knew too much. They told you the stranger was connected to work, but the answer came too quickly. They walked past without speaking to that person and hurried toward the street. When you asked why they seemed nervous, they said they were only tired. Yet their hands shook as they searched for the car keys. The drive home felt longer than usual. They kept checking the rearview mirror, though no one appeared to be following you. At a red light, their phone lit up with a message, and they turned it face down before you could read the screen. That small movement changed the air between you. For months they had been careful with that phone. They never hid it completely, which somehow made their behavior harder to question. They left it on tables but carried it whenever they left the room. You had noticed the pattern before, but that evening was the first time it felt connected to something real. At home, they went straight to the kitchen and began cleaning a counter that was already clean. You stood in the doorway and asked whether there was something they needed to tell you. They froze for 1 second, then continued wiping the same spot. "Not tonight," they said quietly. Those two words hurt more than a denial. They did not say there was nothing to tell. They only asked you to wait, as if the truth had already been scheduled. Before you could ask another question, someone knocked at the front door. The stranger from the lobby stood outside. They held a small paper bag and looked uncomfortable about being there. The person you loved moved between you and the doorway, blocking your view. "You shouldn't have come here," they said. Then they looked directly at you with an expression that was not angry or jealous, but deeply sorry. Your partner closed the door before anything else could be said. You asked what was inside the bag. They picked it up and held it against their chest like something fragile. For a moment it seemed they might finally explain everything. Instead, they carried it into the bedroom and locked the door. You had never been locked out before. Not during arguments, not during grief, and not even on the night you nearly ended the relationship. You stood in the hallway listening to drawers open and close. Then you heard something hit the floor, followed by a sound they tried hard to hide. They were crying. You almost knocked, but stopped when their phone began ringing inside the room. The call ended, then started again seconds later. On the third attempt, they answered with one sentence that made your stomach tighten. "I can't keep pretending anymore." You had met during a difficult season for both of you. Neither of you wanted a serious relationship, which made the early days feel honest and easy. There were no promises about forever, only quiet dinners and long walks after work. Somehow those simple moments became the safest part of your lives. They were private from the beginning, but never cold. They avoided questions about the years before you met and changed the subject whenever family came up. You assumed there had been pain they were not ready to share. Loving them meant allowing some doors to remain closed. One family member had warned you once. It happened at a small holiday dinner when your partner stepped outside to take a call. The family member leaned closer and said, "They think silence protects people." Before you could ask what that meant, your partner returned. Over time, the relationship became more serious. You moved into the same apartment, divided the bills, and planned a future without making a dramatic announcement about it. They remembered how you liked your coffee and always left the hallway light on when you worked late. Nothing about their love felt fake, but there were missing pieces. They never invited you to their old neighborhood. They kept one drawer in the bedroom locked and said it contained private family documents. Most strangely, they refused to discuss marriage even though they spoke freely about growing old together. You had accepted that hesitation until 3 weeks earlier. You had found them sitting on the kitchen floor after midnight with a travel brochure beside them. The brochure showed a coastal town several hours away. When they noticed you, they folded it quickly and claimed it was junk mail. The next day, they took the brochure to work. That evening, they came home with sand on the edges of their shoes, though there was no beach near their office. You asked where they had been, and they said a meeting had taken place outside the city. Their explanation almost worked until you saw the parking receipt. It came from the coastal town in the brochure. The date showed they had been there for most of the day. You did not confront them because part of you feared the answer more than the lie. Instead, you waited for them to choose honesty on their own. Now they were behind the locked bedroom door, speaking to someone in a broken voice. You heard them say they had tried to fix everything before you discovered it. Then they said your name without using it, calling you the person who trusted me. The words sounded less like betrayal and more like guilt. When the door finally opened, their face looked drained. The paper bag was gone, and the locked drawer behind them stood open. You saw no secret gifts, romantic evidence, or hidden photographs. There was only a thick folder and a small wooden box. They sat on the edge of the bed and asked you not to interrupt. You remained near the doorway, afraid that sitting beside them would feel too forgiving. They placed the folder between you and opened it with shaking hands. The first page carried your address and both of your names. It was an application to leave the apartment. Not a lease cancellation, but a request for emergency relocation. The form had been signed by your partner 2 months earlier. Before you could ask why, they opened the wooden box and showed you a key you had never seen. It belongs to the house where I grew up, they said. The house had been empty for years. Their family had left after an event nobody discussed, and your partner had refused to return. Recently, the property had been scheduled for sale, forcing them to go back and clear the rooms. That was why they had traveled to the coastal town, but the house itself was not the real secret. Inside, they had found documents proving that one family member still legally controlled part of their life. Years earlier, your partner had signed an agreement while under pressure and without understanding its full meaning. The agreement tied their savings, debts, and future property to a family business that was now failing. They had spent months trying to separate themselves from it. Every appointment, hidden call, and unexplained trip had been connected to lawyers and financial records. They had not been protecting another relationship. They had been trying to stop an old family mistake from reaching you. The stranger worked for the family business. They had come to warn your partner that legal action would begin within days. The paper bag contained copies of notices that had been delivered to the old house. If the claim succeeded, anything shared between you could be questioned, including the apartment and the savings account you had built together. You stared at the forms, searching for a reason they had not trusted you with this. They said they planned to solve it before you ever needed to know. Each time they got close, another problem appeared. Their silence grew until telling the truth felt more frightening than losing everything. You made plans for both of us without me, you said. It was the only sentence you could manage. They did not defend themselves or ask for immediate forgiveness. They simply nodded, because that was the part they could no longer hide from. The emergency relocation form had been their last plan. They wanted to move you somewhere safe, transfer the lease into your name, and face the legal fight alone. They believed sacrifice would prove their love. Instead, it made you feel like a passenger in your own life. You walked into the living room and found the stranger's number written on one of the notices. Without asking permission, you called and requested the full truth. The stranger hesitated, then explained that your partner had rejected several easy solutions because each one would have placed some risk on you. That choice had delayed the case and made the consequences worse. Then the stranger revealed something your partner had not. The family business could be separated from your shared life, but only if your partner testified against the family member who had pressured them into signing. They had refused because the testimony could cause that person to lose everything. The secret was no longer about money. It was about loyalty. Your partner was trying to protect you without destroying someone who had once protected them. Years earlier, that family member had cared for them during a terrible period, then later used that trust to secure the agreement. Gratitude and anger had become so tangled that your partner could not choose between them. You ended the call and returned to the bedroom. They were placing clothes into a suitcase, moving slowly as if they had expected you to send them away. You asked where they planned to go. They said they would return to the old house until the case ended. For the first time that night, you saw the full shape of their plan. They intended to disappear from your daily life, carry the legal burden alone, and call it protection. You wanted to stop them, but another thought held you back. Love could not survive if every difficult choice was made in secret. You told them not to leave yet. Hope appeared on their face, but you did not offer comfort. You placed the suitcase on the floor and said there would be no more hidden decisions. Then you asked the question that would decide whether the relationship could continue. Will you tell the truth, even if your family never forgives you? They did not answer immediately. They looked toward the wooden box, then at the papers spread across the bed. For years they had believed love meant absorbing pain before it reached anyone else. Now that belief had placed both of you in greater danger. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but their hands kept shaking long after it ended. The family member did not shout. They reminded your partner of every sacrifice they had made years earlier. Then they said loyalty should matter more than paperwork. Your partner listened until the guilt began pulling them backward. You did not take the phone or tell them what to say. You only placed the signed relocation form on the table in front of them. Seeing it reminded them what silence had already cost. They ended the call without changing their decision. The following weeks were uncomfortable. Meetings replaced dinners, and financial documents covered the kitchen table. Some nights your partner slept on the couch because neither of you knew how to return to normal. The truth had removed one secret, but exposed damage that could not disappear quickly. You learned that they had borrowed money without telling you. They learned that you had considered leaving long before the stranger arrived. Each discovery created a new argument, but the arguments were finally about real things. For the first time, both of you stopped protecting the relationship from honesty. The legal case moved faster after the testimony. The agreement had been created through pressure and missing information, which weakened the claim against your shared property. Not every problem disappeared, and part of the savings was still lost. Yet the apartment and your future income were no longer at risk. The family member stopped speaking to your partner. That loss affected them more deeply than the money. They spent several evenings staring at the old house key, turning it over in their palm. You understood that doing the right thing did not make the grief less real. One weekend you drove together to the coastal town. It was the first time they allowed you into the place they had spent years avoiding. The house smelled of dust and salt, and several rooms were almost empty. Still, one bedroom remained untouched. Inside were childhood drawings, school papers, and small objects saved by the same family member who later betrayed their trust. Your partner sat on the floor and admitted they had been afraid that telling the truth would erase every good memory. You sat beside them, not to solve the contradiction, but to let both versions exist. You spent the afternoon packing the room. Some things were kept, some were thrown away, and some were left for another day. Before leaving, your partner placed the wooden box on an empty shelf. They kept the key but no longer carried it like a punishment. Back home, the relationship did not return to what it had been. You separated your finances and agreed to delay every major plan. They began sharing difficult information before they had a solution, even when their first instinct was to hide it. Trust returned through small, uncomfortable choices rather than one dramatic promise. Months later, you stood in the same elevator where they had first pulled their hand away. Another difficult meeting waited in the lobby, but this time they reached for you before the doors opened. Their hand was still trembling. They did not let go. The secret had nearly ended your relationship, but the secret itself was not the deepest wound. The real damage came from believing love gave one person the right to carry the truth alone. You stayed, not because everything had been forgiven, but because honesty had finally become more important than appearing strong. Sometimes love survives when the secret is revealed, but only after the person hiding it stops calling silence protection.